we begin Samachay Amud Beis, the new parak, the new chapter, Elu Dvarim. So Elu Dvarim b'Pesach Dechenes HaShabbos. These are items on Pesach that you're allowed to do that will supersede Shabbos. Shchitas Zrikas Damei. You're allowed to shecht it and to spritz its blood. Umichui Krovav. The Gemara is going to explain what that is, but that's allowed because it's necessary. Otherwise, it'll ruin the innards. V'haktoras chalavav, and the burning of the fats on the mizbeach. So these are things that you're allowed to do on Shabbos, even though generally these are prohibitions on Shabbos. But since it's necessary for the Korban Pesach, you're allowed to do it. Avol tzliyasa, but the roasting of the Korban Pesach, which is also necessary for the mitzvah, but it's not necessary to be done on Shabbos. If the 14th day is on Shabbos, I could do it on the 15th, meaning that night. And so you have to wait till after Shabbos to begin roasting the lamb. V'hadachas karavav, and also rinsing the innards. Einadachas Shabbos. These would not supersede Shabbos. You can't do it if the 14th day of Nisan is Shabbos. Similarly, carrying it, even though that's a rabbinic prohibition because the living animal carries itself as well, but it's prohibited. Also, bringing it outside of the tchum, outside of the 2,000 am outside the city, would also be prohibited to be done on Shabbos because it's a rabbinic prohibition, and you could have done it before Shabbos. And also cutting off a wart, meaning a blemish on the animal, even if you do it in a rabbinic way, meaning not a normal way of cutting it off, such as pinching it off. Rabbi Eliezer, however, Rabbi Eliezer says it does supersede Shabbos, and we saw something similar to this in Shabbos, Parak Rabbi Eliezer the Mila, in the chapter of Rabbi Eliezer, where he says that all things that are needed for preparation for a bris are allowed to be done on Shabbos. And so too here, not only the korban, but also the prep for the korban, the prep of the offering is also allowed to be done on Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer said it's actually a logical argument, a kal v'chomer. If the slaughtering, the actual shechting, which is a Torah prohibition, is allowed to be done on Shabbos because today's the day, it's Erev Pesach, you have to do it. So, these which are a rabbinic prohibition, for sure should be allowed to be done on Shabbos. You're going to tell me they don't supersede Shabbos? Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua responded and said, no. Yantiv Yechiach, I can prove it to you from Yantiv, where the Torah says you're allowed to cook food that's needed for Shabbos. Yet, you're not allowed to do rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos, on Yantiv, just because you're allowed to cook. And still the rabbinic prohibitions remain in place. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't know what you're talking about. What kind of comparison is that? How can you compare rabbinic prohibitions on matters of mundane need or just you want something? Of course you can't do it. But this is a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah to be done. Of course you're allowed to do it. Heishuv Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva responded, who was a student of Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, well, I have a proof against it. The halacha is that if somebody became tamei to a deceased person, they came into contact with a dead person, they have to, they are tamei, they are ritually impure, and they need to, before they go to the mikvah on day 3 from when they became impure, and day 7, they have to get spritzed by a red heifer water, the Ephar Park. And that's prohibited rabbinically on Shabbos. And so if the 7th day, which is the day that the Pesach is brought, is Shabbos, they're not allowed to have the spritzing done on them. And the reason is because it's a form of construction, of completing something, because they become completed, as it were, with the spritz on them. And so it's prohibited to be done. It's needed for a mitzvah because it's the only way they're going to be allowed. This person's allowed to bring the Korban Pesach is if they get the spritz on them. They need this in order to be able to do a mitzvah, and yet because it's a rabbinic prohibition, they can't do it. And therefore it doesn't supersede Shabbos. And the basis, as Rabbi Kiva is good and Rabbi Shua is saying, is because you could have done this beforehand. This is not something that absolutely is it's designated day, the designated time to do it is today. It's not true. So too all the rest of the things that are needed for the mitzvah, but not they are prep. They are not actually the mitzvah itself, and so it doesn't supersede Shabbos. You can't do it, even though it's just a rabbinic prohibition, not a Torah prohibition. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Rabbi Akiva, you're bringing me proof from something that I don't admit to you, and I don't believe is true. Aleo anidan, about that itself, I have a comparison to make. The same comparison that I just said. If shechting of the Korban Pesach, the actual slaughtering, which is a Torah prohibition, yet the Torah says that you have to bring it on its time, meaning even on Shabbos, since that's the 14th day of Nisan. That's the day to bring the Pesach, so you bring it even though it's Shabbos. So from there itself, I'm going to learn this concept that the spritzing of the red heifer water on this person that had come into contact with someone that's dead, that they get spritzed even on Shabbos because it's only a rabbinic prohibition. Shouldn't it be logical and for sure that you transgress, that it supersedes Shabbos? Amalei Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said to his teacher, he said, maybe it's the other way around. Why are you comparing and saying just as you can shech the animal, so too, and you can bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, so too you can spritz the red heifer water, even though that's really just prep work. So Rabbi Akiva is going to make an argument that he himself doesn't believe in order to get his teacher, Rabbi Eliezer, to point to utter the point that's really the crux of this issue. Rabbi Akiva, maybe it's the other way around. And now we're at 66a at the top. Rabbi Akiva, maybe it's the other way around. If the spritzing of the red heifer water, which is a rabbinic prohibition, yet it doesn't supersede Shabbos, and you cannot do it on Shabbos, even though that it's necessary in order to be able to bring the Korban Pesach. This person is just going to miss it. Shechting, for sure, which is a Torah prohibition, should also be set aside and not be allowed to be done on Shabbos. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer's teacher said to him, Akiva, his students, he called him Akiva without his title, Rabbi Akiva. Akiva, if you say that, if you make that argument, you're uprooting an obligation in the Torah that the Torah says, b'mo'ado. You have to bring this Korban Pesach in its time, whatever its time is, Shabbos or a weekday, you have to bring it. Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. Amalei Rabbi, so he said, yes, indeed, teacher. For the shechting, it says b'mo'ado. Haveli moed la'elu kamoed l'shchita. Find me anywhere in the Torah it says moed, do this in its time for the prep as well. That the Torah says do it on Shabbos, just like it says it for the shechting. The shechting explicitly says this is the time to do it, the 14th in the afternoon, and even if it's Shabbos. But the rest of it, it's not necessary to do it that day. You could have done it beforehand, and it's not. It's only a prep for the mitzvah, so you can't do it. Kollel amar Rabbi Akiva. And this is the rule that Rabbi Akiva said. All parts of work, prohibited work, whether rabbinic or biblical, Torah or Darabana, that you could have done before Shabbos, they will not supersede Shabbos. Shchita, but the shechting, which it has to be done on the 14th in the afternoon, that's its time. It's not going to supersede Shabbos. That will supersede Shabbos. Derech Shabbos, because that's the only time you can do it. So the Gemara tells a story, a brisa, where the leaders of the community, the Bnei Beseira, forgot a certain halacha, and Hillel, who had come back from Bavel, Hillel being of the Davidian line of Beis David, came back from Bavel, and he brought a teaching with them and was able to teach them. Tana Rabbanan, halacha zunis alma mebnei Beseira. This is the beginning of the Gemara on 66a. The students, the people of Beseira, or the leaders, they forgot a halacha. It was the 14th day of Nisan, the day that the Korban Pesach has to be brought, and it was on Shabbos. And they forgot. Can you do it on Shabbos or not? Guess it had been a few years from the last time the Erev Pesach was on Shabbos, and they didn't remember. Do you bring the Korban Pesach on that day or not? So they said, is there anybody here that remembers this halacha, whether Pesach is brought on Shabbos on the 14th day? So they said to him, yes, there's someone here. His name is Hillel the Babylonian, and he just came from Babylon, and he studied under the tutelage of the two great leaders, Shammai and Avtalion. And he knows. So they called him. They sent a message to call him. They said to him, do you remember the halacha if Pesach is brought on a Shabbos or not? He said, he says, don't you see the comparison? Is it only one Korban Pesach that we have on Shabbos? We have more than 200 Karbanos that are designated to a specific day that are brought on Shabbos. In other words, this is not a new concept. We have every single week, we have the daily Karbanos in the morning and the afternoon of Shabbos. So that's 100, right? And besides for that, there's also the two extra ones for the Musaf. So that's another 100. So you have four every week. So that's more than 200 that are brought on Shabbos. So you see, when the designated time is to bring it on Shabbos, so that you would bring it. Said, how do you know that that's true? He said, I can compare this to the daily Talmud and the Musaf as well, because it says the term Mo'adai in its designated time. It says in its designated time by the Talmud, by the daily Korban. Just like the daily Talmud supersedes Shabbos, because it says in its designated time. So too by Pesach. And even more so. And even if you don't know this comparison of the word b'ma'adai, which you would need a teacher to teach you, even if you don't know this, it's even logical as well. If somebody missed the daily Talmud offering, it doesn't create a punishment of kares where the soul is cut off from its source. Yet it supersedes Shabbos. Shabbos Pesach. But a Korban Pesach, if somebody doesn't bring it when they're obligated, their soul is cut off from its source. Isn't it logical that for sure it would supersede Shabbos? So they love this. He knew the halacha and he can argue and prove it. So this is the humility of the Bnei Beseira. They put Hillel as their leader, even though they were the leaders. They said, you know more. And they minuhu nasi, and they appointed him to be the prince, the leader of the community, aleim, upon themselves. And all day he was teaching the laws of Pesach. But he began to also tell them that they're at fault for not knowing this halacha. What is it that brought about that I, a foreigner, came from Bavel and I'm your leader today? It is that you were lazy, that you didn't take the opportunities of learning from the teachers that were available to you, the two great leaders, Shammai and Avtalion. After that, they asked him a question. Rebbe, tell us, if somebody forgot to bring the shechting knife, the Kohen doesn't have anything to shecht with. Me'er Shabbos, he forgot to bring it before Shabbos. Mahu, what should he do? So Hillel said, I learned that from my teachers and I forgot it. But let's see what the people do, because even though the people themselves are not prophets, they're the sons of prophets. In other words, the people will know what to do. So let's just watch the people and they'll know. So somebody that had a lamb, so the wool is thick. So he stuck the knife into the wool, and that's the way they brought it to shecht. Misha Pischa Gedi, and somebody had it as a goat. He jammed it in between the horns, and that's the way they brought it. So he saw them do it, and he says, yeah, that's exactly what my teacher said. I forgot. That is what my teachers, Shemayin of Talion, said, and that's what I had learned, and I had forgotten. Amar Ma'am. So now we're going to analyze this teaching. It said, it says in its proper time by the Pesach, and it says so by the daily Talmud, by the daily offering in the morning and the afternoon, in its place. So too, just as the daily offering supersedes Shabbos is done even on Shabbos, so too the Pesach. And how do you know that the daily offering supersedes Shabbos? So you could say, if it does, so too Pesach. If it's because it says in its proper time, so what I need a comparison. It says so by Pesach, and if that is enough to let me know that it needs to be in its proper time, so then just say because it says in its proper time. So that's not sufficient to teach us this. So by the daily Talmud as well, it shouldn't be sufficient. He says it's more explicit here, because it says about Shabbos, the Shabbos offering, Shabbos b'Shabbatah. The daily, the Shabbos special offering for Shabbos, al olah satamid, upon the daily olah, meaning that you have to bring the daily olah, and on top of that, you're going to bring the Shabbos olah. So you see that Shabbos offering and the daily offering supersede Shabbos. Mechlal olah the tamid kreva b'Shabbos. So you see that the daily offering is brought on Shabbos. Amar ma, va'id kavachem. Then Hillel said, and besides, there is also a kal v'chomer, there's also a logical argument because the Talmud is not punishable by kares if you miss it. And this is punishable by kares if you miss it. So if the Talmud, which is less severe punishment, if you miss it, supersedes Shabbos, for sure Pesach should. But nevertheless, there's a challenge that we can challenge against it to say, no, the Talmud is daily. It's constant. So therefore, it supersedes Shabbos as well. But the Pesach, which is not constant, maybe you have to do it the day earlier. And besides, the Kollel, the daily offering entirely goes up on the altar. So maybe that's special. Whereas the Korban Pesach doesn't go on the altars all the time, entirely, because it's meant to be eaten. Kavachomer, Amar Luhu Bereisha. So the Gemara says, at first he said the logical argument to them, and they challenged him and said, no, there are distinctions. The Pesach could be less severe, even though that the punishment is more severe, but there are strengths to the daily offering because it's done every day, so Shabbos needs to be included. And besides, because it entirely goes up on the altar, so it's an ascent offering, which is a greater offering. Maybe that's why it supersedes Shabbos. Then he said to them, well, actually, it has the same words in its proper time by both. And we know that the daily Talmud supersedes Shabbos, so to Pesach. Well, if he has a comparison of the words, so why did he need the logical argument of the Kal V'chomer as well? He said to them, you don't know the teaching of the comparison of the words, and you can't make that up on yourself. He said, look, the Gzeira Shava, the comparing of the words, which needs to be a tradition, so that I have a tradition, and you forgot your teaching from Shmai Vavtal, you never knew it, so therefore you don't have the tradition. Because a person cannot make up a comparison of words. That has to be a tradition from Sinai. But a logical argument like I made, that's something you could argue. And you should have. And to that they said, no, we actually have an argument against the Kal V'chomer by saying, no, the Talmud has two strengths over the Pesach. It's daily, constant, and because it entirely goes up on the Mizbeach. Amar Ma. So another part of this, the teacher said, when Hillel didn't know what to respond about what to do with the knife, he said, let's see what the people do. And The people stuck it into the lamb wool or in between the goat horns. And now we turn to Samach Vavam and base. Vaha ka'avid aveda bekachim. But there's a problem. They are doing service in kachim. It's a sanctified animal, not a lot of benefit from it, and they are utilizing the animal to bring their knife to the Beis Hamikdash. Hillel. So now they follow the opinion of Hillel, another teaching of Hillel. The Tanya, as we learned, Amra alav al Hillel. Hillel would have, what he would do is miyamav lemal adam lasim. No one ever misused Hillel's donations as offerings. How so? Because he would bring it into the courtyard before it was sanctified. So if by mistake somebody used it, it was still not a sanctified lamb. Umakdisha, and right there he would sanctify it. And then he would lean on it like every korban needs smicha, leaning. And then and then he would have it shechted. So this is the same thing over here. They had not yet sanctified the lamb or the goat, and therefore they can use it to bring the knife. So Pesach b'Shabbos heichi matzi makdash. He said, but you can't do that. You're not supposed to sanctify an animal on Shabbos. But Tanan in Makdishin, as we learned in the Mishnah, you don't sanctify anything on Shabbos, and you don't donate the value of something, and you don't donate an item itself. The emak be in teruma. You don't separate teruma, which is the 2% from that goes to the kohen from produce, umasers, and the 10% tithe. Right, the tithe. Kol elu b'yantiv amru, and these are prohibitions to do even on yantiv. Kal v'chama b'Shabbos, for sure you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. So the Gemara says you're right. That's only when you're donating something that you've obligated yourself to donate, but you don't, or there's an obligation to donate, but there isn't a specific time. You could have done it yesterday. You could do it tomorrow. So why are you doing it on Shabbos or yantiv? But an obligation that has a set time. Like the Korban Pesach, it's got to be done today. Makdishin, you can even sanctify it on Shabbos. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, as Rabbi Yochanan said, Makdish Adam Pitzcha b'Shabbos v'Chagigasa b'Yantiv. A person can sanctify his Pesach on Shabbos if the 14th day of Nisan is Shabbos and he hasn't sanctified it yet, or his Chagiga offering, which is the Yantiv offering, he can do even on Yantiv. So there's another problem. Even though it's not sanctified yet, your own animal, you're not allowed to put a load on a donkey and make it move on Shabbos, because that's working your animals, and your animals have to rest on Shabbos. So mechamer is the prohibition of having your animal carry a burden for you, load it up and have it carry. So the Gemara says, no, this is mechamer k'la'achayad. This is an abnormal type of carrying, because goats and sheep, they're not load-bearing animals. They're not animals that usually carry things for you. And this is not a normal way of carrying it. So it's considered an abnormal carrying, and that's going to be permissible to do on Shabbos in this case. The Gemara says, no, it's not. Even though that it's not a Torah prohibition, it is a rabbinic prohibition, and so it should be prohibited. Indeed, that was the question that they had asked Hillel. Look, we have something that is a rabbinic prohibition, not a Torah prohibition. They can carry it with lambs, but we don't know whether or not that's permissible. It's permissible in the Torah. Biblically, it's permissible, but rabbinically, it's prohibited. And can I do an abnormal way of doing it in order to allow it for the need of a mitzvah? Can I do it in a backward way? I forgot. Let's see what the people do. If they are not prophets, at least they are the children of prophets, and indeed they reminded Hillel of the teaching. Now Hillel, who had told them that you should have studied and you would have remembered the halacha, and it's because you didn't study and you were lazy, so therefore you didn't know the halacha, and that's why I became your leader. He forgot the halacha. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Kol ha-misyahir, anybody that is haughty, that considers themselves better than others. Im chachamu, if he is wise indeed, chachmasim istalekas memenu, he will forget wisdom. The imnavihu, and if he's a prophet, his prophecy leaves him. From this story of Hillel, we learn that a wise person will lose his wisdom. The Amar Mar, as the teacher taught, he started admonishing them. And then he had to admit, you know what, I too learned and forgot. And if he's a prophet, he will forget. The prophecy leaves. And we learn this from Devorah, the prophetess. The Sefer, it says, Chadlu parazam Yisrael, Chadlu, the parazon, this wealth, or this ability to have plenty, was lost in Yisrael, and she's admonishing them because they ceased to work for it until I, Devorah, got up. Shakamti Emi Yisrael, I, a mother in Israel, got up and lead you. And it says after that, Chsiv's Uri Devorah, Uri Dabirishi, and then she said, "Awaken, Devorah, awaken, speak song," because she forgot her, she lost her prophecy, and she had to ask for it to come back. Reish Lakish says the same is true for someone who gets angry. If he's wise, he loses his wisdom, and if he's a prophet, he loses his prophecy. Where do we know this from? We learn that from Moshe himself. The Sefer said, Moshe became upset with the leaders of the military that they had brought back, some of the spoils of the war. And then the next teaching is Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen. He taught the leaders of the military the next halacha. That which Hashem had commanded Moshe. Why did Moshe not teach it? Moshe had forgotten the teaching, and Elazar had to teach it. And if he's a prophet, prophecy leaves him. From Elisha, if not for the face of Yehoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, is who I am looking at. If I would look at you, he got angry. Then he asked for the song to be sung in front of him, so that he should be able to get prophecy. The Yad Hashem, the hand of Hashem, came upon him. Amar Rabbi Mani Bar Patish, and Ramani Bar Patish said, furthermore, if somebody gets angry, if he was destined to greatness, it will be taken away from him. Minalan min Eliyav. We know this from David HaMelech's older brother Eliyav. Shenema, for it says, "Vayichar af Eliyav beDavid." It says Eliyav got mad at David. Vayomer lama zeyarata. Why did you come down here to the battlefield to watch us? Almina tashamat atzon. And with whom did you leave the few sheep we have? Hine bamidbar ani yadati azadancha. Ahena bamidbar, the ones that are in the desert. I knew your evilness. Vesroel of Afcha, the battle of your heart. You came here to watch the battlefield. Now, and the truth is, he was sent there by his father. Now, when Shmuel came to anoint the children of Yishai, by each one it says this is not what Hashem chose. However, by Eliyav it says it differently. It doesn't say Hashem didn't choose him. It says Hashem said to Shmuel, "Al tabit al mareyo val giva kamasu." Do not look at about how good he looks or how tall he is. Ki ma'astihu, because I have rejected him. Mechlal tahavaracham le'adidna, meaning at first he was the chosen one, and Hashem had rejected him. Okay, so that's the Daf Samach Vav, and Bez Hashem tomorrow morning we'll do Samach Zayin 67. I wish you a good day, Kultiv.